infrastructure is that there's people in place that we're building up some people here, that there's people in place to fill spots when people go. And so anyway, and the last thing on that is that next month, on June 13th, Monday, June 15th, Mark McKnight will be here to talk about what's going on there. If you have questions about the nursery or that stuff, he's going to do a presentation just about every much right next month, so please be here. Okay, Bill Haley. Here's some infrastructure for you. He's sitting right here, right here in front of us. Bill Haley just recently retired from the Tennessee Aquarium, and that's maybe where most of you know him from, if you do know him. Bill was there for 28 years as an education outreach coordinator. Bill connected with over 500,000 people during his 28 years there. Bill, that's infrastructure for you. That really is. Most of them were elementary school, and they knew him as Mr. Bill. He was recipient of several awards, including in 2007, the Educator of the Year Award by the Chattanooga Environmental Education Association. And in 2009, he was the Tennessee Wildlife Federation Environmental Educator of the Year. He is also, in 2011, he was inducted into the Saudi Daisy High School Hall of Fame.
I don't know what they were
playing. They probably knew you, Bill. I think they knew you. He is also the current president and longtime president of the Chattanooga chapter of the the North American Butterfly Association, where Bill leads butterfly counts. And this is not weekend exercise. This is serious stuff. I tried a couple of these, and Bill wore me out. He really did. They really go. He also does these hawk counts. I called him one day, and I called him, it was about this program. What are you doing? He said, well, I'm up here on Saudi Mountain, sitting on some ledge, counting hawks as they go through. They record all this stuff. He has counted over 100,000 hawks during his time keeping these things. Bill's hobbies include basket weaving, of course gardening, and he's an excellent gardener, he really is. And lastly, he is not a coin collector, not an antique collector, not a car collector. No, he is a collector of insulators, of those utility pole, electric glass insulators.
I have a friend that does that.
Believe it or not, that's one of the other things he does, and that's seed parts. It's a collection of all different colors. And Bill, I'm really grateful for you. Come on.
Thanks, Dennis. I have to admit that Dennis he twisted my arm pretty hard to get me to do this program. I said, Dennis, I'm retired now. I don't do that stuff anymore. So it's been over 2 years since I presented a program. And I'm nervous, but I got to tell you guys, you don't make me as nervous as a gymnasium full of first graders. Been there, done that, believe me, many a time. So it's nice to be here this evening. When I knew that I was going to retire, oh, by the way, Dylan, I've been very impressed with you too. I just wanted to tell you that. When I decided to retire, come on in here, Kim. I already know a bunch of you folks. I had just moved to a new place up in Saudi Daisy, and it's a special place because when I was a kid, my grandparents lived there. The first time that I went in that house was probably when I was 2 days old. And then when my grandparents passed on, my uncle raised his family there, and he did a lot of renovation and fixed the place up pretty nice. And he was there for 24 years, and then when he passed on, one of his wishes was that the land stay in the family if at all possible. Well, I'm the only family that has stayed here in Chattanooga. And so within 2 days, I'd agreed to buy the land. And so it's got an extra special connotation for me. It's been in the family for 3 generations now, and it's just a special place. And I decided, being a educator at heart, I guess, and somebody that just loves bugs. For 17 years, I was one of the leader of the bug club at the Tennessee Aquarium. And we had a club for kids 5 to 8 years old that loved their bugs, or 5 to 12, excuse me. And so for 17 years, I was Mr. Bill with the bug club. And all the kids knew me as Mr. Bill. I kind of miss that sometimes, but I like being retired too. I'm sure some of you would probably agree that that's not bad either. And I decided to do a biological survey of the property where I live. And I've got 4.5 acres, but most of it's wooded, so most of it's taking place right around my yard. And by the time I retired in July of 2020, I had 615 species. And I tell people, and they say, "Wow, that's pretty impressive." And the thing about it is I keep looking and I keep finding more species. And so when I wrote up the little blurb for Dennis that was in the newsletter, I think I had 1,365 species at that point. This is plants and animals, okay? And I'm up to 1,405 now. I've added 40 more since we did the first draft there, Dennis. So, and probably the vast majority, well, not the vast majority, but probably the majority of animals that I've added have been night-flying insects. And so we're going to talk about biodiversity in your yard after dark. And Dennis, hopefully I don't get your computer to crash here. Let's see what. Okay, so I've got to give you a little bit of background here. When I was at the aquarium, I was lucky to go to Southeast Arizona 3 times to an invertebrates conference. And man, talk about people that are crazy about the bugs. I mean, those people, woo, they were on out there. But I learned a technique that they use to survey night-flying insects called blacklighting. And here you see the setup that I use. I've got one that actually, it's got like jumper cable clips, and it clips to your car battery. So anywhere you can drive, and you can find a place to tie a line to, 15 feet away, you can set up a black light. Now you don't want to do it under a street light or, I lived in North Chattanooga for 41 years. I never was able to set up a black light because you had street lights, you had a house right here beside you, a house over here, a house over there. People like to leave their lights on at night. Not good for black lighting. Where I am right now, I can't see another house from where we are now that the trees have leafed out, and I love it. It's all forested around where I live. And so that is really perfect for black light. So this ultraviolet light I bought years ago from a company called BioQuip. I understand that they've gone out of business now, so I don't know if you can still get them. But you just set up a cotton sheet. It's got to be cotton because cotton reflects the ultraviolet light more than synthetic fibers. And weight it down, and you're ready. You're set up. You're ready for the bugs to come, and they do show up. Okay, so here's a little quote. A typical suburban backyard in wetter regions of eastern North America may contain, and you can look at the picture there, and there are probably at least 50 species of insects on the sheet right there. At least. There might be that many moths. But may contain millions. This is 1 yard, folks. May contain millions of insects and spiders and thousands of species. Now I tell people I've got over 1,400 species, and that's good. I've got a friend out in West Tennessee that's got 1,500 moth species. Over 1,500 in his yard. So it can be done. I mean, they're there. You just got to know to look for them. And by the way, the author of that particular quote is Art Evans. He wrote a book all about beetles. He's a beetle expert. An inordinate fondness for beetles. He also wrote a field guide to insects and spiders of North America. I was lucky enough on one of my trips out to Arizona. It was my birthday, and I got to spend a whole day riding shotgun with Art Evans out through the Sonoran Desert looking for bugs all day long. It was one of the best birthdays ever. Here's another quote from Art. Nearly 100,000 species of insects, spiders, and their kin are known to live in North America. Now let that sink in, over 100,000 species. And some scientists think that it might be double that. There's still things that are being discovered. I'm sure some of you know what the big moth is there on the sheet. That's probably one that you're familiar with, which we'll talk about in a minute. Now, I'm sure that some of you folks are familiar with Doug Talbot. Has anybody ever heard that name before? Raise your hand if you've ever heard that name. I say that jokingly. I know we've got a lot of Doug Talbot fans around here. I am too. In his Bringing Nature Home, every caterpillar you make in your butterfly garden becomes either a moth or a butterfly or a source of food for hungry birds. So our goal is to grow as many caterpillars as we possibly can, because it's important for a lot of different reasons. Not least of all is the fact that if we have a multitude of plantings, you're going to have a multitude of caterpillars that eat those plantings. I was just looking today. I've got a little plot. I'm working on a new little bed out in my meadow. And I've got some sundrops out there. Some of you are probably familiar with sundrops. Beautiful plant when they bloom. They're nice yellow. Susan says they spread all over the place. She's right. That's why I planted them. But I love them. And lo and behold, something had been eating on my sundrops. And I was just tickled to death because a caterpillar had found them and had been eating them. You see, I'm not like a lot of gardeners. I don't freak out whenever I see that one of my plants is being eaten on. That actually makes me proud. I say, okay, that plant has earned its keep. It's earned its keep. If I find a caterpillar on it, it's earned its keep. All right, now I want to start out talking about a group of moths. And I know this is billed as partly as a pollinator talk. These moths are absolutely terrible at pollination. They are just awful at pollination. How many people have seen one of these? Luna moth. The reason why the giant silkworm moths are terrible at pollination is because they don't feed at all as adults. They do all their feeding whenever they're a larvae, when they're a caterpillar. They don't have mouth parts as adults. They have no reason to visit flowers and water around in the pollen. So I don't think they're probably really good pollinators. They might crash into some. I know there's been plenty of nights where I've been standing out there and a big Luna moth comes and crashes right into my head, out of the dark. You never know what you're going to encounter. So of course the Luna moth. Now I found out when I started studying about moths that trees are very important if you want to attract a wide variety of moths. Trees are very important. And I've tried to list the host plants for a lot of these, and it was very interesting looking up some of these host plants. But host plants for the Luna moth: alder, beech, cherry, hickory, willow. I say, I've got some of that stuff. I've got some of that stuff. That's why I'm getting Luna moths. I've got some of that stuff. The tulip tree silk moth. Guess what its host plant is? Cherry, sassafras, tulip tree, of course. It's a pretty large moth too, and you see its wings are all beat up. It's It's interesting, I'll get a Luna moth that'll come to my sheet one night and it'll be absolute, pristine, beautiful, just emerged out of the cocoon, and it'll show up 2 nights later and its wings are just tore all to pieces. It's not at all unusual to see these giant silkworm moths with their wings all beat up. The thing is, as adults, their whole job in life is to find a female or a male and mate and lay eggs, and then they die. They don't live usually over a week. So they get pretty beat up in that week. This is really pretty one, the Imperial Moth, another one of the giant silkworm moths. Host plants: cedar, elm, hickory, oak, walnut. This is why it's important, even if you live in a subdivision, or if you live somewhere where there's other people with houses around, pay attention to what trees they've got in their yard. If you don't have all these trees, pay attention to what's around in your neighborhood, and that'll give you a clue as to what might be living right there in your own yard. And just to give you an idea of the size of this Imperial Moth, there's my hand to indicate the size of this moth. It's a good sized moth, beautiful moth too. I was so tickled last year to finally, after 3 springs, to finally get a Regal Moth, also known as the Royal Walnut Moth. This one is probably more readily recognized by its caterpillar, and I wish I had a picture of its caterpillar, but I don't. I haven't found one to take a picture. By the way, if some of these pictures are terrible, Dennis asked me when we put this together, he said, "When are you going to get a real camera?" I said, "I've got one. It's in my pocket right now." These are all taken with my cell phone, by the way. So I apologize if they look fuzzy from way back there. Hopefully they look all right. But back to the caterpillar of the Regal Moth, it's known as the hickory horned devil. And I would get calls when I was at the aquarium, and somebody'd say, "I've got this big green caterpillar, 6 inches long, and it's got orange and black spines coming off its head," and I knew immediately what it was. It was a hickory horned devil. It was the larvae of the Royal Walnut Moth, or the Regal Moth. So I was really tickled to finally get one. It took me a couple of years, but finally I had one come to the light. And as I recall, it crashed into my head when it flew in. The Io moth, host plants birch, maple, and oak. You know, a lot of moths are just incredibly beautiful. I think that butterflies are beautiful, but when I used to do programs about insects with kids, I would ask the kids, I said, "Who do you think's more pretty, the butterflies or the moths?" Invariably, they would always vote for the butterflies. I said, if somebody asked me that question, I'm going to say the moths are pretty. I think some of the moths are just stunning. And the rosy maple moth is actually a fairly common moth. It's one of the smaller of the giant silkworm moths. But the host plants maple and oak. As I go through this presentation, you're going to start hearing some of the same things over and over, and that gives you an idea of how important some of these trees are. Okay. Everybody ready for another quote from Doug Tallamy?
Always.
The wild creatures we enjoy and would like to have in our lives will not be here in the future if we take away their food and the places they live. Now, I realize, folks, I am preaching to the choir here. I realize that. But more people are starting to think like this. More people are starting to think, gosh, mowing that 3.5 acres every week is getting old. Some people never do think that. I can't figure those folks out. But anyway, in essence, what they're creating a lot of times is a biological desert, 3.5 acres, that the butterflies fly over to get somewhere else, and the moths. We need to keep that in mind. Well, I thought it wouldn't be fair if I didn't throw in some other critters that occasionally come to my lives. And the nickname for this one is the toe biter. Now, I did not stick my toe down there near this thing because it was almost 3 inches long. The giant water bug. It's the most ferocious insect predator in the pond. It catches small fish, tadpoles, pretty much whatever it can catch. You see those front legs, they're like just skewers, and it comes up and it just skewers whatever it wants to eat, and then it sucks all the juices out of it. And I live up on top of a hill. I don't really live really close to any big sources of water, but I get lots of aquatic insects that fly at night, and I'll get 3 or 4 of these a year. And of course you get your spiders. You know, you lay out the buffet, you're going to have a few predators show up, and so I get some big, huge wolf spiders. I had one come to the light here a couple of years ago, and if you know anything at all about wolf spiders, the females, when the egg hatches, the young crawl up on their abdomen, and she rides the young around with her. And I took a picture of one night, and not only could you see her eyes reflect in the thing, you could see the eyes of the little babies on her back, which is really creepy. Yes?
Why do they call it a wolf spider? Because from back here it doesn't look fuzzy or
Oh, believe me, they're very fuzzy. Most insects are very fuzzy, believe it or not. But they call it a wolf spider because they don't really spin a web, they hunt for their food. They're always on the hunt, and they run after it and catch it, like a wolf. Track it down like a wolf. That's why I figure that's why they're called wolf spiders. Either that or they were discovered somebody named Wolf. Spiders have to eat too. And then I was standing at the light one night, and this big dude comes and crashes into the sheet. The giant stag beetle. And he's, those mandibles are over 1 inch long. But he does not use those to pinch you with. He uses those to battle with other stag beetles. This is a male giant stag beetle. And he'll get on a stick or a limb or something, he'll joust with another stag beetle, and whichever one throws the other one off the limb, they get the right to the females or whatever. Yeah, all in all, this insect is probably 2.5 to 3 inches long. Okay, on the left you got the summer fish fly, another aquatic species, which once again is pretty good size. And then on the right is really strange, and I found 4 species of mantis flies at my lights at night. And it's like the back part of them is like a lace wing, and the front part is a praying mantis. They've got legs just like praying mantis, and they'll catch insects there at the light. Very interesting. I had never seen a mantis fly. I'd seen pictures of them, and now I found 4 species in my yard. And talk about the paint job on some of these insects. Just incredible. The top 2 pictures, leafhoppers, the broad-headed sharpshooter. Now you got to love the names of some of these insects. Somebody had some fun with some of these names, and then somebody didn't feel like having fun at all and just called this other one the Japanana ladia. It doesn't have a common name, and so you'd think something that pretty would have a common name, but it doesn't. How many people have seen walking sticks? Walking sticks use oaks. If you've got oaks, you've probably got walking sticks. And they'll get to be about 5 or 6 inches long. And just a few beetles that I run across. I realized, Dennis, when I was looking back through this, that we got a couple of them transposed, but that's all right. Up on the upper left, the tile-horn prawnus. I've got a bad habit about putting my finger up next to one so to give you an idea of how large it is. And then right to the right of that is the best bug, which is also called the patent leather beetle. Now, I'd been out my friend Jane Trapman had come up to the house one night, and we were blacklighting, and I'd been out, and she had just left, and I come back in the house, and I hear on my right shoulder, I hear, and it kind of sounded like a bee. It kind of freaked me out, so I jerked my shirt off real quick, and I had a best bug on my shoulder about 2 inches long. And they can actually make a sound. They make a squeaking sound at you. I told Jane later on, I said, I'm glad you weren't the one that had that on your shoulder, because you might have got some looks whenever you jerked your shirt off. The Triceratops beetle is actually on the left, down on the bottom, and then you've got the Carolina sawyer beetle, which is one of the longhorn beetles. In the woods all around my house, I've got lots of dead snags and dead wood and stuff like that, and a lot of these beetles use that dead wood. They burrow in the dead wood as larvae. And so I have lots and lots of great longhorn beetles, as they call them out in Arizona, the cerambycids. I had to learn some of my scientific. They said, oh, there's a cerambycid. I said, what is a cerambycid? Oh, it's a longhorn beetle. And here's the largest beetle in eastern North America, the Hercules Bee. And we're talking about a beetle that's about like that, about 2.5, 3 inches long. Once again, he uses those horns. He can't pinch you with those horns. He uses those horns to joust with other males. And I get lots of cicadas. Scissor grinder cicada over there on the left. I've actually had cicadas come out of the ground and crawl up on my sheet and slowly emerge as an adult from their larval skin. Were you with us that time, Anita, that we were down in the River Gorge with the Bug Club kids and one did that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was memorable, wasn't it? And then the greater angle-winged katydid, and I found out one thing that katydids like to eat. I use wooden clothespins to hold up the sheet that I shine the flash, the ultraviolet light on. And I've got one clothespin, and the darn katydids just love to eat that clothespin. I go, there'll be 2 or 3 nibbling on my clothespin. They've worn it down to almost nothing. So amongst other things, they eat clothespins. And of course, you get neat stuff like eastern yellow jackets and the American pellicinic wasp. Just last week, I was out there at the black light, and a European hornet. Is anybody familiar with those? They look like gigantic yellow jackets, except they're like 2 inches long. The biggest one I'd ever seen came flying up, and I found out they're active at night. Sometimes they'll show up at my light, and I just go over on the other side of the sheet whenever they show up. I just try and keep the sheet between me and them, but when you're trying to take a picture of a moth and you got this gigantic 2-inch long hornet buzzing over your head, it's hard to stay still, even when you don't have a real camera. Dennis says, yeah, if you had a real camera, you wouldn't have to do that. Okay, we've got a lot of moths that are very beautiful moths, and despite all the people that are into moths that have done studies on the different host plants and things like that, we don't know what their host plant is. This is a little small moth that I see early in the spring, the filigree moth. And Dennis, I discovered we misspelled the filigree too. That's all right. You can't run a supermarket on just bread. You can't run an ecosystem on just lawn. So we don't know what this little guy uses for a host plant. Is it just me, or does anybody else see the little stretched out mint green teddy bear on its back? Everybody see that? That's what it always reminds me of. I said, oh, there's the teddy bear on its back. A good identification cue. This is actually a pretty common moth, and it's got a wingspan of about 2 inches. It's a good sized moth. The deep yellow euclena. We don't know what its host plant is. Obviously, I've got some around because I get them most every night. A few others with unknown host plants, the red-spotted emerald. And then over to the right, the dimorphic, oh boy, Epipatia. Anyway, it's a pretty little moth, green and pink. Then you got the stained Lophosis down on the bottom. By the way, people say, how in the world did you learn all these moths? Well, I highly recommend the iNaturalist app. How many people are familiar with iNaturalist? If you don't have the iNaturalist app, you need to put it on your phone. That's how I keep up with what I'm seeing. I've made over 5,000 observations to iNaturalist, and out of that I got 1,400 species. So sometimes, some nights I'll just put everything that I see on there just to have a record of it. So iNaturalist is a very good way. There's also this the Peterson Field Guide to Moths. I highly recommend it, but I would recommend first getting the iNaturalist app. You just take a picture with your cell phone, even if it's not a real camera, it works. I'll never let Dennis forget that one. I kind of like that. Here's some more species that we don't know what their host plant is. Paler diacne, upper left. And then the mulberry leaf tire. Now, since somebody named it the mulberry leaf tire, what do you reckon maybe its host plant is? I figure it must be mulberry, but who knows? I do have mulberry trees. The medium moth, which first time I saw this moth, it's actually a moth that flies during the day, and it was nectaring on goldenrod. Talking about goldenrod, and everybody should have some goldenrod. It was nectaring on goldenrod. And then the orange epipagus. Beautiful, beautiful little moth. White and orange, it's the volunteer moth. Okay, now we're getting into moths that eat either detritus on the dead leaves and things like that on the ground, or they eat fungus or lichens. You know, in my woods, I've got a lot of fungus and lichens, and so I have a lot of these type of moths. The American idiot moth, it eats dead leaves and lichen. Very striking little moth. Every time I see this, even though I've got a bunch of pictures of it, it's just such a photogenic little moth. I have to take its picture again. Down below that, the Richard's fungus moth, which uses shelf fungi. And then you got the scarlet-winged lichen moth. That's a pretty snazzy looking moth. And since it's a lichen moth, guess what it eats? Lichens. Okay, now some people work all of their lives to get all the weeds out of their yard. Not me. If I didn't have weeds, I wouldn't have a green yard. And it still looks good when you mow it. Anyway, these are some species that you'll rely on some of those plants that people think are weeds that they try all their lives to get rid of and stress out about it. And it's needless to stress out about such things, but some people do. The laudable arches. And one thing I like about moths, a lot of moths are green. We don't have many green butterflies, but man, you got some just killer green moths. And when you think about it, if this moth was landed on the side of an oak tree with those green lichens, do you think you'd even be able to see it? Beautiful camouflage coloration. And you got the virgin tiger moth, which has, when it spreads its wings, it's got beautiful bright orange-red wings with black spots on them, just very striking. The notch-winged wave. All of these use dandelion, clover, plantain, and other low plants. I didn't put weeds there, but some people would use the term weeds. Things that, if you actually believe all those commercials on TV, are going to kill you if you leave them in your yard, you know. Need to put some poison on that. No, don't do that. Okay, here's one of my favorites. the Ipactes. Talk about a stunning moth with those beautiful eye spots there. But what I really like about it, the host plant is poison ivy. Poison ivy, it's good to know that something uses poison ivy. Now, I didn't get it into this presentation, but just last week, I had the Showy Emerald show up. First one I'd ever seen. I had 3 of them on the same night. It is absolutely one of the most beautiful moths I've ever seen. Uses poison ivy as a host plant. So I still don't like poison ivy, but you know, it's a native plant, folks. It's a native plant. According to some people, anything's native, you're supposed to believe it, right? That's not right. But I like that one. That's a very striking little moth.
How large was it, you say?
How large is it? It's got a wingspan of a little bit over an inch. Yeah, it's a medium-sized moth. It's not large by any stretch of the imagination. So now we're going to go to wildflower and vine eaters. These are things that you may see right in your own garden. Here's another one of those beautiful green moths, the green Leuconic. And guess what it uses for a host plant? And goldenrod. And I were just discussing that she'd been putting goldenrods in. I have too. And asters. I'm sure some of you've got asters. Everybody needs to have asters. Good grief. You got to have something late in the season for all the pollinators late in the season. But look at the pattern on that moth. Just absolutely stunning when you look at the pattern on some of these little moths. And I think that's what really fascinates me more than anything. A moth that's got a wingspan of a 1/4 inch can be one of the most beautiful things you've ever seen when you blow it up. Here's a good one. The Great Plume Moth. Host plants, grape and Virginia creeper. Both of which I've got lots of where I am. And this is a tiny, tiny little moth. This is one of the plume moths. There are a lot of plume moths around. Very, very strange, bizarre looking moths. And this is probably the showiest one of the bunch. Okay, then you got the beautiful wood nymph on the left. Host, grape and Virginia creeper. You got the half yellow moth, and I really like this when I found out what its host plant is because I just planted some of these last year. Maryland golden aster. How many people got Maryland golden aster? Yeah, I'm a fan of Maryland golden aster now that I know there's something that's going to eat it. And the Clymene moth, a lot of people have seen this. It shows up very well during the day. I know a lot of times on our butterfly accounts, somebody will find a Clymene moth and everybody stops looking at butterflies and they got to take pictures of the Clymene moth because it's interesting looking moth. It uses the Eupatorium, bone sets, Joe Pye weed, everything in that family. I found some on bone set some of its caterpillars on bone set last fall. And like I say, when I grow a plant and I find out something's eating it, that makes me happy. I'm not one of these gardeners that runs for the poison. When somebody eats my plants, I put stuff out there hoping that they get eaten.
Do you grow potatoes?
I have grown potatoes.
You share the leaves?
Yeah, I've had potato beetles eat them up. Yeah, I'm share alike guy. Okay, here's one that might have been, the caterpillar might have been right under your nose and you never even realized it. If you look down there in the lower right, there's a picture of one of the caterpillars on a orange coneflower. I found them on orange coneflower, I found them on black-eyed Susan, I found them on zinnias, I found them on mint, I found them on a lot of different plants. But what they do is they'll start eating the petals of the flowers and then they glue them on their back to use for camouflage. And they can be right there on the flower head and you don't see them unless you look close for them. But the wavy lined emerald, look how pretty that little moth is. Another one of the emeralds. We've got a lot of different emeralds around here, and they're all green, and they're all neat looking. But be able to look out in your garden this summer. Is there anybody here beside me that actually spends time just out going and staring at their garden? Does anybody do that? I mean, we'll be sitting in there watching TV. I say, I'm going out for a while. I'll go out and look at the garden for a while. You can only watch so much TV, folks. Okay, here's the grape leaf folder, grape and evening primrose. Now, you know, come to think of it, sundrops is in the evening primrose family. I wonder if that's what's been eating my sundrops. It might be. If it is, that's good. And then the southern spragula. I don't know how to pronounce that last name. I'm just making this stuff up. Bindweed. Now, is bindweed like morning glory? What do y'all think? I'm not sure exactly what they're talking about when they talk about bindweed. I think it's some sort of morning glory or something like that. Pretty little moth, though. It's got Tennessee, University of Tennessee tendencies, too. Okay, here's one of my favorites, the mint-loving pyrosta. In the upper left there, you see what a beautiful, it's got a beautiful purple-red background color with bright orange markings. And then you see my thumb next to the actual mint-loving pyrosta to show you the size of that moth. When you do moths, you got to learn to think small. After you've gotten all the big ones, then you got to start on the small stuff. And my buddy out in West Tennessee that's got over 1,500 species, he said, well, if you'd get a real camera and take some pictures of those little micro moths, you could get a bunch more. I haven't done that yet, but I'm a naturalist. It surprises me. There's times I had a little moth that came in the house with me the other night, and it was crawling around on my hand, and I started to squash it, and I said, no, I'll take a picture of that. And I mean, it was an 1/8 of an inch long. It was a tiny thing, and I naturalist identified it. And then I took it out and let it fly away. So the mint-loving pyrosta, we've got several pyrosta species around here, and they range from bright pink all the way through the reds and yellows and oranges. They are just absolutely gorgeous little moths. Okay, now I'm sure that when Dennis and I put this together, there was some kind of really pithy comment on here, and somehow or another it's gotten lost. And I looked on my copy, and it was all black too. So, envision in your head walking out of my house at midnight, no lights on. I don't have the black light on. Imagine what it looks like. It's just dark. Sorry about that. I don't know how we did that, Dennis. Okay, some more vine and wildflower eaters. The spotted Phosphilla. And once again, look at that nice green color with orange spots on it. It uses greenbrier. If you got greenbrier growing out in the woods somewhere, there are things that feed on greenbrier. And then you got the 3-line flower moth, which uses false boneset and Joe Pye weed. So don't be alarmed if you've got a plant and a caterpillar starts eating on it. They've been eating on these plants for eons. They haven't killed off the plants. They're not going to kill the plant. It'll grow back. And you'll have the satisfaction of knowing that you're creating either bird food or butterflies or moths in the future. Oh, here's one of my favorites. The goldenrod stowaway moth. Does everybody see it down there on the bottom of the flower? Interestingly enough, I have never found one of these on the goldenrod. I always find them on burr marigold, tick-seed sunflowers. That's what I always find them on. And goldenrod is blooming about the same time, so maybe they stay on the goldenrod and they're just hidden so well I don't see them. But really, really neat moth. The goldenrod stowaway moth. Somebody had fun with that one. Boy, last year I had a bumper crop of blueberries. And I go out one day, I said, "Man, there's not many leaves on that blueberry plant as what there used to be." So we're going to talk about blueberry eaters now. How many people got blueberries in their yards? Everybody should have blueberries in their yard. They should be used more as an accent plant in gardens. I mean, the blueberry plants are beautiful. But I had a bumper crop. And I go out there, and here's all these yellow-necked caterpillars just munching away, and they ate every single leaf off that plant. Guess what? It's got leaves again this spring, so it's no big deal. But I was glad to see them because I was giving some, I was getting some food, and they were getting some food too. That was a win-win as far as I was concerned. So here's some more blueberry specialists. The green dusted zeal. Over there on the left. We've got lots of different zeal moths, and talk about beautiful camouflage coloration. All the zeals have got just these beautiful colorations, and will just blend right in on the tree trunk. So the green dusted zeal eats blueberries, the decorated owlet, which is the one in the upper right, fairly common little moth. I get it quite often. And then the large lace border. I haven't seen the first one this year, but once I start getting them, see, moths are seasonal just like a lot of other things. Certain moths you get in early in the spring, other moths you get mid-spring, late spring, into the summer, into the fall. I even did some black lighting in December this year, and I got some moths. There's moths that are active even in the wintertime. And these two always remind me of fighter jets. They just got neat, look like paper airplanes. Anybody ever made paper airplane back in their younger days? The faint spotted Palphus, which is the one down below on the left. Host plants are Aster and Spanish needle. I'm sure some of you have had run-ins with Spanish needle over the years, where you've walked through a patch and all of a sudden you're picking all those little pitchforks off your pants. And then the dark spotted Palphus, which is over on the right. And the only there are several differences, but one of them's got a spot that's filled in, the other spot is hollow. This is all I can figure why they named them the way they did. But the host plants for the dark spotted Palphus are ash, maple, and willow. Okay, in the upper left, the Baltimore Snout. Always looks like it's dressed for a formal occasion. It's got that vest on. Just looks so pretty. Neat looking moth. The Bandit Tussock moth, by the way, the host plant for the Baltimore Snout is maple. Bandit Tussock moth, the host plants are elm, oak, willow, and alder. And then we got the Canadian Melophinolophia. Wow, I think I might have said that right. Everybody see it? Anybody see it? Well, let's see. It is up in the top there, kind of at a 30-degree angle. I had to put that in there. It was such a perfect job of camouflage. I had to throw one like that in there. Right beside my light, I've got a hackberry tree, and a lot of moths will land on that hackberry tree, so I get good camouflage shots when they do that. Sometimes I look at the camera and I say, "What was I trying to take a picture of?" I can't find the moth myself. How many people got familiarity with inchworms? I found several inchworms today. But you know how important inchworms are? A few years ago, we had a chickadee family in a house. They were feeding youngsters. And have you ever seen these little green inchworms that hang by threads down from a tree? Mm-hmm. That little chickadee caught 19 of those in 30 minutes and took them and fed them to her youngsters. Wow. She'd go in and picking them out of the air and taking them and feeding them. So it's incredible how many caterpillars a bird will go through, and yet we still have moths. So there's an abundance, and there's a reason why there's an abundance. So we're getting into the geometer moths. Those started out as inchworms. Geometer moths is a huge family of moths. All of them are inchworms. You got the brown shaded gray on the left, host plants oak, cherry, poplar, and willow. The juniper twig geometer up on the upper right, host plant is red cedar. The granite angle, the host plant is pine. A lot of people are surprised when moths use cedar and pine and things like that, but there are quite a few species that do. And you've got the underwing moths, very camouflaged patterns on the top wings, colorful underwings. Over on the left, you got the false underwing, which is a gorgeous little moth. Usually when it's at rest, it will hide that orange hind wing. And I think it's even prettier when you can't see that orange to distract you from the rest of the camouflage coloration on it. Host plants are tupelo and black gum. The locust underwing, guess what the host plant is? Black locust. Ilia underwing, which is the most common underwing at my house, and the host plant is oak. I've got lots of big oaks in the woods around my house. Okay, then you got the Harris's 3-spot over on the right, which is a very, very spectacularly patterned moth. Host plants are apple, willow, cherry, and blueberry. Okay, there's another blueberry eater. Then you got the white furcula down on the lower left there. Host plant is cherry. I can just show you folks just a bare smidgen of the moths that I see in this presentation. But I hope that if nothing else, it gives you the idea of what's out there and what is possible and might be in your own yard. Okay, you've got the double-toothed prominent up in the upper left. The host plant is elm. Lower left, you got the delightful dagger. I like that name, the delightful dagger. Host plant is elm. And then you've got the eastern panthea. Man, I used to look at the field guide, I said, man, I'd love to see an eastern panthea. I just think they're neat looking moths. And I get them sometimes. Their host plant is pine and spruce. And here's a tiger moth caterpillar. Everybody's seen these. There are lots of different species of tiger moths. None of these sting. They're hairy, they don't sting. They're not going to sting you. But if it's fuzzy, it's probably going to be a moth. Butterflies they'll have spikes and things like that on them. They rarely are as fuzzy as a moth caterpillar. Okay, here's an interesting one. There are actually a fairly large family of moths that mimic bees and wasps. And this is a wasp mimic. Matter of fact, when I first took pictures of it, I thought it was a wasp. And then I looked at it, so it's a moth. So the red maple borer, it actually bores into the roots of red maples and sugar maples. And it's a day-flying moth too. They'll sometimes come to my lights, but since they look like a wasp, they just fly around during the daytime. They don't care. They look like a wasp. Nothing's going to bother them. Okay, I just want to throw in some with some interesting host plants. In the upper left is the small necklace moth. Host plant is persimmon. Anybody got persimmons growing at their place? Yeah. Then you've got black locust for the host plant for the black dip moth. And once again, those the pattern there on the black bit moth is just stunning when you really look at it. And then you get one down on the lower right, green with orange zigzag lines going across the wings. Very furry. A lot of these are really fuzzy and furry. If I'd known this young man had asked about furry insects, I would have brought some real good close-ups to let him know how furry insects are. If you ever get a chance to look at them through a microscope, do it. You'll be surprised. Oak, hickory, and maple for the wavy-lined heterocampa down on the bottom. Okay. This is something out of Doug Tallamy's book, and he's real big on this, and he really he pushes certain species because they're more important to more different types of insects. And number one, oak. 534 insect species that Doug Tallamy has documented using oak at some point in their life cycle. Willow. I've got a willow tree. When we lived over in North Chattanooga, I guess a willow seed fell in one of my bog gardens, and I had a little willow tree sprout up. And when I moved up to Soddy Daisy, I took my little willow tree with me, and it's now a big willow tree. And I found out how important willows are. 456 species of insects. I just cut it back every year and make it bush out. I'm glad to have my willow. Cherry and plum, and we're talking wild cherry here. I'm sure you've seen the tent caterpillars in wild cherry trees in the springtime. Those just turn into kind of nondescript brown moths. But 456 species also in cherry and plum. I've got a little bitty American plum that I started from a stick that somebody gave me a few years ago. And came out there last summer. Something had eaten all the leaves off of it. It was a dagger moth caterpillar. Well, I was happy about that. And it's got leaves this spring, so it made it. Poplar and cottonwood, 368 species. Blueberry, 288 species of insects use blueberries, folks. You should plant more blueberries. Maple and box elder, 285 species. Elm, 213. Pine, 203. Hickory, 200. Ash, 150. So all of those are very important trees. And I think this is my last image here. The angle-lined prominent caterpillar on willow, and this is my little willow tree that I took up there, and I noticed last year, I go out there and look at it all the time hoping to find caterpillars. And last year I started finding these little tents. Well, they weren't tents, they would like roll the leaves and put them together up to the tip of the thing, but I never could find any caterpillars. I'd look and look, well, I don't really want to tear into that during the day. And then I went out one night, and here's all the caterpillars moving down the stalk, looking for new leaves to eat. So, once again, if you plant it, they will come. Now, I want to thank y'all for putting up with me. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
I had seen, promotions to leave your leaves, with Luna Moths on. So I was wondering when you talked earlier.
I left my leaves this winter. I didn't move any of them. And I can't really tell that it hurt my yard at all.
Yes, certainly, yeah.
Especially my weeds, they like it. But no, I think that's a good idea to leave the leaves, because a lot of things do overwinter in leaf litter.
Well, and I think I'm going through the life cycle too, is my question was thinking when you said host was willow, so the host for the caterpillar, but then it turns into a lunar, then it somehow
the Luna pupates
in
down
the
in the leaf litter.
It-
Yeah. A lot of moths and butterflies pupate down ground level down in the leaf litter. Probably more moths than butterflies, but there are some butterflies that do too.
We have a problem in our house with the front porch light ceiling.
Mm.
Either on or off. Do you have any
depends on whether you want to attract moths or not. When I was a kid, the way that I got interested in insects, I'll just go ahead and tell you. When I was in the 4th grade, 4-H club came to our school. And back then, way back in the dark ages, you know, when I was in elementary school, they were all about raising ducks and pigs and chickens and stuff like that. Well, we lived out in the country. We didn't live that far out in the country. And we didn't have any ducks and pigs and chickens. But they had one thing about entomology. And that's how I got interested in insects. So when I joined the 4-H club in the 4th grade. So, I used to leave the porch light on at night. That's how I used to attract moths. And it works. But
is it bad for them? That's what I've heard.
I don't leave my black lights on all night long. When I'm done for the evening, I just turn it off and let them go on their way. I wouldn't leave it on all night long, because you will find that birds will find out that you're attracting those moths, and they'll come and eat them in the morning. So if you leave them on and then turn them off when you go to bed, no problem.
I'll go home and tell my husband.
Now, I tell you what I think really affects moths badly is these people that have the floodlights where they leave them on all night long on their houses. It's just like a population sink probably for moths. They probably go there and they don't ever leave. Yeah.
Hotel California for the mom.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm still learning how to share, and I mulch my blueberries with pine needles. You're saying a lot of moths originate the grubs, the caterpillars in leaves.
Mm-hmm.
Are pine needles less a place for that than, say, leaves?
Heck no, the blueberries need acid. I put the pine needles around.
No, I agree,
Don't
I
worry about
do,
that. Yeah.
but I'm wondering if that.
Other insects could use that. Yeah. I don't see anything at all wrong with that.
Less so than hardwood mulch?
You're probably going to get more acidity with the pine needles than you are with hardwood mulch. If you use pine bark mulch, you'll have more acidity that way. I know I put pine bark mulch around. We had a rhododendron that looked dead when we first moved up there, and I put pine bark mulch around it and I bathed it. Man, it is beautiful right now. It took 3 years, but it's come back.
So pine needles are less attractive to grubs than, say,
Yeah, I don't think the pine needles are gonna bother anything. I would use them just for the acidity for your blueberries. Yeah.
Do you ever bait for moths?
You know, I don't. I've got my buddy out there in West Tennessee does, and there's another fellow in Middle Tennessee, and they bait all the time. And I've never had a huge amount of success, but a lot of people have. I mean, especially in the fall and the winter, that's when you get more stuff to a bait, is in the fall and winter. And I haven't done it, but a lot of people do. They use rotten bananas and all manner of stuff, beer, whatever. Any other questions?
Bill, if you were advising people, what are the 2 or 3 most important things people could do to have more moths in their yard?
Have a lot of different plants. That's where a lot of people go wrong, is that they've got maybe a huge stand of one thing, but you need to kind of put a buffet out there for them. You got to have a lot of biodiversity in your yard to expect a lot of biodiversity at your blackfly. And so that's why, you know, like Ann, I get new plants. I don't know where to put them, but I get them, and then I find somewhere to put them. Yeah, I don't think you can have too many plants. Can you, Bob?
Not so far.
The leaf litter sounds really important too. The leaf litter and the sticks and branches.
you know, it was highly entertaining to me. I'd look out the window this winter and there would be a flock of robins and it looked like the yard was alive. They'd just be tossing leaves everywhere. So they're turning leaves all winter long. They don't lay in a mat. They're turning them, flipping them, looking for stuff. So they probably find some of the things that are under there. But you know, before I've always raked them up or mowed them up and put them in the compost or used them for mulch or something. I just left them lay. I didn't worry about them this year, and everything's done fine. Now, if you got something like cardinal flower or something like that, you don't want to let it get under that much leaf litter because it's going to die. If it's cardinal flower, it might die anyway. But at least that's my experience. I know I've got to tell them my favorite quote from a master gardener. I shouldn't mention her name. She said, you want to know the key to being a master gardener? You got to kill a lot of plants. She knows who she is. Right, Lisa?
Get out there and kill some plants.
Yeah.
Are there any introduced species that are threats to?
There are none that are in competition with native species because for the most part native species don't use introduced plants, and usually those have come in with that plant into this country. I get one at my lights. It's called Dunoma deponens or something like that. It doesn't have a common name. It was only discovered in this country in 1972 by a friend of mine that's a professor down at Dalton State, and it uses mimosa for a host plant. And then I've got, unfortunately for me, I mean, the land that I live on has been inhabited for 100 years. And it's had 100 years to gather every non-native thing it possibly can. I do draw the line at kudzu, by the way. You know, so I find Atlantis webworm moths, which are pretty little moths. They're orange and white checked. They're pretty little things. And I've got a lot of those because I've got way more Atlantis than what I need to get rid of it. But some of these things, you know, you got to choose your battles sometimes. And I realize that I won't live long enough to get rid of some of these things. So I just, you know, you just learn to live with them if you can. But those are the two that come to mind, being non-native species that have done well in this country because their host plants are everywhere too.
The Gypsy Moth, that's invasive.
Well, we're lucky that we have not got Gypsy Moths here yet. They will be here one of these days, probably, but they're not here yet. So yes, that's an invasive species which unfortunately feeds on a lot of our hardwood trees. Bad news. I've been up to Hog Mountain, Pennsylvania when the trees were just completely defoliated, but they come back. The problem is if they get defoliated 3 or 4 years in a row, that it weakens them and it can kill them then. Any other questions? I'm so glad to be able to finally get to do a program in person. Dennis asked me, I said, you know, I do my best work in person. I don't want to do that. So I appreciate you letting me do a program in person. I feel honored that I'm the first one to do a program and you get to come back.
Since February